Open your bathroom cabinet right now. Tampons, pads, painkillers, heating pads, an entire industry worth $40 billion exists just to manage one biological process. But for 300,000 years, every woman who came before you faced the same monthly reality with no pharmacy, no plumbing, no privacy, and absolutely no shame. So, how did they actually do it? The answer is not what you think. It is far more sophisticated, far more strategic, and in some ways, far more advanced than what we do today. And by the end of this video, you are going to look at half of human history completely differently. Here's what almost nobody talks about. For most of human history, periods were not a private struggle. They were a public, planned, deeply organized part of community life. The shame, the secrecy, the discomfort we treat as normal today, most of it is a recent invention, less than 200 years old. Before that, ancient women had figured out something we have largely forgotten. They had built entire systems, biological, social, and spiritual, around the process modern medicine still does not fully understand. And it started with something almost too simple to believe. They had fewer periods than you do. First reveal: the biological surprise. A woman in the modern world experiences roughly 450 menstrual cycles in her lifetime. A woman 20,000 years ago experienced fewer than 100. Some anthropologists estimate as few as 50. Not because their bodies were different, because their lives were. Ancient women started menstruating much later, around age 16 to 18, compared to age 12 today. They spent most of their fertile years either pregnant or breastfeeding, both of which suppress menstruation almost completely. A typical Paleolithic woman would breastfeed each child for 3 to 4 years, during which her cycle simply paused. The result? While you might bleed for a week every month for 40 years straight, your ancient ancestor might have bled for less than a year across her entire lifetime. This wasn't an accident. It was the default human pattern. Our bodies evolved for a life of long pregnancies, long nursing, and very few periods. The modern menstrual experience, frequent, painful, lifelong, is in many ways an evolutionary mismatch. Your body is doing something it was never designed to do this often. But when periods did come, ancient women had answers ready, and those answers reveal something extraordinary. Second reveal: the engineering of materials. The popular image of an ancient woman dealing with her period is grim. Rags, leaves, hiding away. But archaeology tells a completely different story. In ancient Egypt around 1500 BCE, women used softened papyrus reeds, rolled tightly and shaped, the world's first known tampons. Egyptian medical texts, including the Ebers papyrus, describe these in detail. They were not improvised, they were designed. In ancient Greece, the historian Hippocrates documented women using lint wrapped around small wooden sticks for the exact same purpose. Roman women used wool, soft, absorbent, and easily washed and reused. In Japan, women used folded paper layers held in place by cloth belts, a system so effective that some versions of it survived into the 20th century. But the real innovation was happening in places without written records. Indigenous women in North America used soft, absorbent moss harvested from specific tree species, knowing exactly which mosses absorbed the most and which caused irritation. In parts of Africa, women used cotton, sea sponges, or specially prepared animal hides. In the Pacific Islands, woven plant fibers were shaped into reusable pads, washed in seawater, dried in the sun, and used again. These were not desperate solutions. They were carefully selected, tested across generations, and passed down with the same precision as any other survival technology. And here is the part that genuinely surprises modern researchers. Many of these ancient materials, natural sponges, cotton, moss, are more absorbent, more breathable, and far less likely to cause infection than the synthetic products dominating modern shelves today. We didn't improve on the ancient solution. We replaced it with something more profitable. Third reveal: the social system. But the materials were only half of it. The real innovation was social. In nearly every ancient culture, menstruation was not hidden. It was structured. And one of the most fascinating examples comes from a building. The moon hut, or menstrual lodge, or red tent, depending on the culture. From Native American tribes to the ancient Hebrews, from West African societies to remote villages in Nepal that still practice it today, women on their period would leave the main community and spend a few days in a separate dwelling. Modern critics often describe this as exile, as shame, as segregation. The historical reality was almost the opposite. Inside the moon hut, women were freed from all daily labor. No cooking, no farming, no childcare, no obligations to husbands. Older women, midwives, and grandmothers gathered there. Knowledge about reproduction, birth, herbal medicine, and the female body was passed down in this space. Knowledge no man was permitted to hear, and no daughter would learn anywhere else. The Cherokee believed women in this state were spiritually powerful, dangerous to disrupt, and closer to the source of life than at any other time. The ancient Hebrews built ritual baths called mikvahs specifically for the renewal that followed. In many West African traditions, women on their cycle were considered closer to the ancestors and the only ones who could perform certain sacred ceremonies. The shame attached to menstruation in many modern cultures is not ancient. It is medieval at the earliest, mostly Victorian, and almost entirely the product of religious institutions that systematically erased the older traditions. For most of human history, your period was not a problem to hide. It was a few days of rest, sisterhood, and inherited wisdom written directly into the calendar of the tribe. The emotional human story. In 1991, two hikers in the Italian Alps discovered a body frozen in ice. He was 5,300 years old. The world called him Otzi. But Otzi's discovery led to researchers to something far less famous and far more important. In the years that followed, archaeologists began to re-examine the remains of ancient women preserved in similar conditions: bogs, glaciers, burial sites across Europe and Asia. What they found rewrote everything. Many of these women were buried with small bundles, tightly wrapped cloth, hide, or woven fiber, often stained, often carefully placed near the hips or hands. For decades, no one knew what these were. Some researchers assumed they were medicine pouches. Some thought they were religious objects. Then, in the 2010s, chemical analysis revealed traces of menstrual blood, herbs known to ease cramping, and absorbent plant material. These were personal care kits, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 years old, buried with the women who had made them, used them, and cared enough to keep them close, even in death. One burial in particular, found in southern Germany and dated around 2200 BCE, contained a small leather pouch holding folded linen, dried yarrow, and willow bark. Yarrow stops bleeding. Willow bark is the original source of aspirin, a natural painkiller that modern science would not isolate for another 4,000 years. The modern parallel. Here's what nobody tells you about modern menstrual products. Disposable pads and tampons as we know them only became widespread after World War I, when nurses on the battlefield discovered that cellulose bandages used for wounds were incredibly absorbent. The companies that had been making those bandages suddenly had a peacetime market and an entire industry almost born overnight. Before that, for thousands of years, women used reusable cloths, sponges, and natural materials exactly like their ancestors had done. What changed wasn't the biology. What changed was the marketing. Companies needed women to feel that the old ways were dirty, embarrassing, and primitive. So advertisements from the 1920s onward emphasized shame, secrecy, and odor. Words like hygienic, modern, and discreet replaced thousands of years of normalized ritual. The shame you may have grown up with, the whispering, the hiding of products in your sleeve, the elaborate effort to make sure no one knows, most of that is less than 100 years old. It was sold to your grandmother. She passed it to your mother. Your mother, often unknowingly, passed it to you. Your ancient ancestors would not recognize that shame at all. They would not understand why something so normal had become so secret. They would look at the modern bathroom cabinet, at the carefully hidden products, at the apologetic whispers, and they would ask the same question: why? Go back to that bathroom cabinet. Every product on that shelf exists because somewhere, thousands of years ago, a woman figured something out. She tested a material, refined it, taught it to her daughter, who taught it to hers. The line of knowledge that connects you to her is unbroken. You are the latest link in a chain of solutions that stretches back to the first woman who walked upright. She didn't need a $40 billion industry. She didn't need shame. She didn't need to hide. She had moss and willow bark and the company of every other woman in her tribe, and the calm certainty that what was happening to her body was the same thing that had happened to every mother before her, going back hundreds of thousands of years. The materials in the cabinet are new. The knowledge in your body is ancient. The next time someone tells you menstruation is something to be embarrassed about, remember, that embarrassment is barely older than your great-grandmother. The strength behind it is older than civilization itself. You inherited more than a body. You inherited a system. The women who built it never asked for credit. They never needed to. They just made sure their daughters would know what to do. If this video changed how you think about something nobody ever taught you in school, like it. Subscribe if you want more stories like this, the kind that connect you to people who lived 20,000 years ago and discover they were not so different from you. And leave a comment with one thing your grandmother or mother taught you that you now realize was passed down from much, much further back than that.